you raise important points, Mr. Chairman, and our approach, the grant programs have always been about building a national capability to respond to what may strike the nation, and doing that in supporting state and local governments because they are the first responders. Frankly, often the public is the real true first responder. The official government agencies come in, and the federal government is really one of backfill. We support the governors and the mayors in their task. So the grant programs have always been about building capability, building capacity to protect against acts of terror and build our ability to respond and protect for anything else. We take that approach, and with a recognition that risk is everywhere. The grants are focused on the highest risk communities, highest risk states and urban areas, and it includes
except, Mr. Mayor, I'd say that because you have the minimum amounts for each state, it doesn't really differentiate. I mean, Louisiana, Alaska get the same amount of money.
That's correct.
And I'm glad that. I'm sure if Senator Landrieu was here, she'd want to add a 0 to her number. But I'm just saying that the population centers are different. We're more broad range. So how does that a risk analyzed approach?
The distribution of grant funds follows a risk formula established in law in the Post-Katrina Act. It's a combination of state minimum amounts for basically on population, and then in addition, based on a risk formula that's an analysis of the threat, vulnerability, and consequences, largely of an act of terror, on large urban areas around the country. An analysis of the top 100, and this year in the appropriation limited to an award of the top 25 riskiest places in the cities. So it's a combination of both. There are a minimum for the communities that don't have as high a risk and then are not awarded additional funds. Every state, there is a floor minimum, essentially, with the understanding that risk is everywhere and that there are requirements everywhere. Oklahoma is a very good example, and there are disasters in Alaska and Kentucky and many other minimum states. I come from New Mexico, it was a minimum state as well, where responses are performed using capabilities developed under the grant. But more importantly, the grants fill a national purpose. We're building national preparedness, and the ability of the United States to respond to a national level crisis is an aggregate of the capabilities that exist in local governments. In Hurricane Katrina, there were 80,000 state and local responders that traveled from around the country. Hurricane Sandy was similar. When we have national level crises, there's mutual aid from every small town in America, and that's capability that's built for the nation with a national level grant program.
Very good. Mr. Richards, I didn't want to leave you not having an opportunity to say something. I know there's been a lot of questions that have been laid on the table, and I'll turn to Senator Paul here in just 2 seconds. But any comment on the general issues in regards to everything from the consolidation to, are there things we could be doing better to ensure that we're fairly managing these from a risk perspective? Is there data that we're not asking for? I mean, give me your thoughts there.
I do have a few comments. 2 years ago, we published a report where we looked at the efficacy of the grant management program, and we had a number of recommendations that identified legislative barriers to the efficiency of the program, where simple facts of different grant programs have different deadlines and the money is available at different times, makes it more difficult for the applicants to...
And that's legislatively?
Yes.
And I'm assuming, I'm just guessing here, as a new member, Congress has done nothing with those.
We make recommendations to FEMA. FEMA is making recommendations.
Yes, I hear you.
Yeah, that's the answer. Yes.
I'm just guessing because we have all these reports we love to get, and then we go on to the next crisis. So, okay, good. That's something for us to do.
And also, it goes back to Senator Chisea's question as well on the difficulty to get the grant funds obligated in a timely manner. A lot of that is administrative because to complete the obligation, there has to be a signature from the recipient at the sub-grantee level. Because those recipients are oftentimes local or small organizations, they don't meet every day like a state administrative agency does. And so because they can't predict when the money is going to be available and when the paperwork is going to come down, they may not have a meeting scheduled. And so the funding just sits until they're available to sign for it. So some greater regularity and some greater consolidation of when these timeframes are would be helpful to both FEMA and the recipients.
Very good. Senator Paul.
You know, I started and we mentioned, some of the abuses from past FEMA expenses, but I thought it'd be good to go through a few more. Mr. Manning, have you read Senator Coburn's report?
Yes, Ed.
Okay. Well, here's one. This is Montcalm County. This isn't from his report. It says the United States is fighting terrorism one snow cone at a time. The West Michigan Shoreline Regional Development Commission, with a grant from FEMA, bought 13 snow cone machines valued at $11,700. That would embarrass me if I were in charge of any of this money, and I would want to respond and do something about that. I think most people saw this when this was in the news, the Halo Counterterrorism Summit in 2012 in San Diego with the zombie apocalypse demonstration. 40 actors dressed as zombies. When a foreign government like Russia reports you, like the Snarf brothers, to know that you're flying back to a part of the world where you may become radicalized. So I think we empty our pockets spending money everywhere, but then the things we ought to be doing we're not doing, and things we ought not to be doing we're doing. But I think it's really because of the overall philosophy of just throwing money at problems. And I'd appreciate if there have been any reforms Mr. Manning done since the zombie apocalypse, and maybe on the snow cone machines and anything else.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, we've done, as you can imagine, a very close analysis of all of the examples raised in the report and many that we hear.
If you have a response, a formal response, I wouldn't mind seeing that if you can send that to our office.
Sure, we do, and we will be happy to provide it to your office as well. There are usually, as you would imagine, answers, reasons for those. The ice machines were intended for exactly that. Is anybody who's been hospitalized will probably recall that they're often given ice chips when they're recovering rather than water, and the idea was to shaved ice in large quantities for heat response. But nonetheless, we have processes in place to scrutinize both the equipment that's being purchased, but more importantly, what we have in place as a grant program now and what we propose going forward would eliminate those kind of acquisitions, because we're talking about defined capabilities, particular number of individuals with training in certain equipment that's defined as a typed resource to be able to achieve, and much less of the kind of more vague, this is something I think might be useful, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it, as we might have seen in the past.
But I'm not sure why we send any money to these cities. Well, why do we send money for terrorism to little tiny cities around the country? I come from a little town. I'm all for little towns, but I'm not for sending anti-terrorism grants to any little cities. I mean, New York is a problem. D.C. is a problem. L.A. is probably a problem. But by sending them to all these little cities, it sort of seems to me as if somehow politicians got involved. I think there was a report a few years ago that said, I think this was in Indiana, there were like 9,000 requests for preparedness grants, the pumpkin factory, the popcorn festival, all of these, cute little things that my family goes to in a small town, but they don't need terrorism grants. Someone should just say no.
Well, Senator, when in the case of small communities, it's often capabilities procured by the state through local governments. And the idea is that you build response capabilities. There's prevention and interdiction of an attack that may occur somewhere, but you build the response often in the outlying areas to come in as mutual aid. And in the case of the snow cone machines, for example, if I recall correctly, that was in the Detroit area, and Abdullah Matab, had that device not failed, that aircraft would have blown up over Detroit.
And the snow cone machine was going to save anybody?
The snow cone machine, as I described, Senator, all of the was to build capability for their mass casualty response to be able to have shaved ice available. And of course, as we all know and have seen reports, it was used for other purposes, and we have procedures in place to prohibit that from happening again. The Bearcats are another good example. The armored vehicles, I think we all saw the utility in the Boston area, and as I described, the idea is to build statewide capability on the part of the state that can come together as a statewide response to wherever threat may occur. And we do know that Zazi, the Times Square bomber was building his bombs and planning in kind of remote exurban Denver and transited most of the United States en route to New York. So our grant program going forward has a much, what we propose is a more constraint on capabilities developed against specific identified threats and hazards that we have all worked jointly on identifying.
Mr. Manning, can
Yes.
I ask you a question, or would you mind submitting this, and then we'll end this panel here, but
These entities, you can FBI. Why do we create this whole new agencies that are all doing surveillance? Well, and they're also doing all kinds of, this is shirt button cameras, pinhole cameras. Thanks for coming. You know, stuff that you might envision the FBI having, but only the local fusion. Thank you.